Hello everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy A23 and see how this particular phone holds up in 2024. Now, the thing I would definitely tell you about this particular phone is that, one, it was a budget phone kind of 2022. So you have to kind of keep that in mind, that if you're going through and if you're buying this phone, it is a budget phone of this day and age. So it's not like the most expensive phone of all time. And it wasn't the most expensive phone when it first came out. You know, it kind of debuted in 2022. So you have to really kind of keep that in mind in the back of your head, that this particular device isn't really trying to compete with the most expensive phones of all time. It's supposed to be like this somewhat cheap budget phone to go and buy. So keep that in mind. But if you do want to pick up some phones that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get that from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy A23, on the front of this particular phone, number one, it's actually a pretty big phone. So Apple does, or Samsung does this thing where some of their cheaper phones still basically give you like a pretty, good size display, good experience for the most part. And with this device, you're getting a very big size display. A 6.6 inch PLS LCD panel is 90 Hz 1080p, and overall it looks like a pretty good device. The only thing is, for one, it actually, for a budget phone, doesn't look that bad. Infinity U display at the very top, a little bit of bezel at the very bottom. There's nothing really super crazy here. It looks pretty good. The things you have to keep in mind though, for one, it is not an OLED display. So this can be kind of an annoying thing. Like if you're going through and getting a phone, you probably want it to have an OLED display as of this point, and this device is not giving you an OLED display. So this in and of itself can be kind of an annoying thing. Personally for me, I guess if I have to use an IPS panel, okay, it doesn't matter. But for the average person out there, I would 1000% recommend getting a phone that is going to be giving you a, a proper OLED display when it comes down to it. So that right there, number one big thing that kind of stands out to me. You are getting a USB Type-C port on this phone, which is great. You're still getting that headphone jack on this phone too. And you're also getting a microSD card slot. It's still very interesting to me that Samsung does throw in microSD card slots on their cheapest A series of phones. I think it's really cool though. I love having it and I'm not going to complain about it. So with this particular phone, you are still getting that type of capability, which, like I said before, I genuinely like. I think it's a really cool thing. And you are essentially getting that type of capability on this particular phone, which again is a very, very nice thing to have. Beyond that though, I think, with the backside of this thing, it's pretty much completely built out of plastic. There's not really anything else super crazy going on here, as you can probably expect. It's a good looking phone. I've always liked the way these types of phones look like. I don't know if there's anything I would look at necessarily and be like, oh my goodness, this phone is lacking here, it's lacking there. It's a very good phone. I think in most angles and most ways I look at it, I'm a fan of it. It's not a perfect device though, keep that in mind. But from a build quality standpoint, and for how cheap this phone was back then, you could definitely do a lot worse with the build quality and the way this phone looked like back in 2022. However, a big thing you want to keep in mind though is that the price tag of this phone has significantly gone down throughout the last couple of years. When this thing first came out, it was like a couple $100 barely. Nowadays, this thing is significantly cheaper. So if you're going through and if you're buying this type of phone, you can kind of get caught with this thing, it's like $100 and something phone. That is not necessarily the problem, but that is one reason why some people may look at this phone and they may want to buy it. But I will tell you, I will be the first to tell you, I would not recommend buying this phone, especially from a price tag standpoint. Yes, it is a cheap phone, but that doesn't necessarily mean this has to be the cheap phone that you buy. The big thing here is that, it's still getting software updates. We'll talk about that in a second. But when it comes down to the price tag, I really do think for less than $200, you can get a substantially better phone than this thing. So that's kind of the big thing to keep in mind here. Otherwise though, there's still lots to love about this phone. But like I said, I think you can definitely do a lot better with the price tag of this particular device. From the camera side though, this thing is giving you that quadruple camera setup on the back side. So it's giving you a 50 megapixel wide, 5 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel macro, then a 2 megapixel depth camera. And I will tell you, when it comes down to this particular lens, I'm a fan of the way this camera looks. I'm a fan of it. It was for what you're paying for back then, I guess it's understandable. But I will tell you, this is not a good camera. And I hate to keep bashing on this phone over and over and over again, but I don't want to give the assumption that this is a crazy good phone or this is the best phone of all time. I want to kind of be a little bit reasonable with it. I want to be a little bit more understanding from this camera's lens. And with this type of camera, it's a quadruple camera setup, which is great and everything, but it's 1080p. This is a full HD camera. I think this is the problem. No 4K at 60, no 4K at 30 on the front or the back. And that can be a really big turn off and a really big problem. If you're going through and getting a phone like this, that can be a really big issue that some people may be experiencing. And personally for me, I definitely want to have a camera that's going to be giving me a better experience than this thing. And I would say that is kind of the problem. So I will tell you in a lot of different ways, I like this phone. It's a really good phone in so many different ways, don't get me wrong, but this is not a phone I'd recommend buying, especially from a camera standpoint. This is a phone that I would look at and be like, okay, like for a budget phone, you're getting a phone that works, but the camera is basically like, not that great. So if you're trying to think like, if you see that 50 megapixel camera and you think it's a good camera, I will be the first to tell you it's not. This is not one of those cameras that I recommend buying in my opinion. So from that perspective, that kind of covers it up there. In terms of software longevity, this was the other area with this phone that kind of threw me off a little bit too, because with this phone, with these A series, you typically get like 2 years of software updates. So for one, you're starting off at Android 12. Now you're getting Android 14. So now you're on Android 14 as of this point. And the thing you have to remember with this particular device is that for one, this is one of those phones that's basically going to be supported basically now. It's not supported any really that much longer. And that again can be kind of a downside for some people. Like if you're wanting a phone that has a future ahead of it, like you're probably not going to want to buy this phone because it's already done getting software updates. So why would you go through and purposely buy this device and get it if you already know it's going to be done getting software updates by the time you're like done with it? So by the time you buy it, it's already done. So I would just recommend, in my opinion, you can get a lot better phones than this thing. And I definitely would say from that particular perspective, this is one of those devices I probably would not recommend buying just because, it's already kind of done getting software support. But I do like this thing because it is on Android 14. So I do think Android 14 is actually pretty good. It's been a very solid version of Android so far. We only have one more version of Android on top of this in a beta. It's not even officially out. So I do think from that particular perspective, it's totally okay. But I will still say in a lot of different ways, you can probably get a much better phone than this thing when it kind of comes down to it. So performance wise, probably the biggest thing here too. I mean, this thing had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 680 chipset with 4, 6, or 8 gigabytes of RAM. So this thing ranged a lot. Like there was a lot of stuff that was going on with this particular device. And I will tell you from a performance perspective, again, it's not actually that bad. It's not a terrible performing device, but like I said, you can definitely get much better than this thing. So why would you want to go ahead and buy this phone when you can actually go ahead and spend a little bit more money and get a little bit of a better device when it comes down to it? And that's kind of how I see it. That's kind of how I say it when it kind of comes down to this particular phone. So like I said, there's a lot of other reasons why. There's a lot of other phones out there that can give you a much better experience than this thing. And even for like $110, you can buy like a Pixel 6a or even a Pixel 5a and get a better experience. You can buy a Samsung Galaxy like S10, I feel like, for around the same price as this thing and probably get a better experience than this phone. So although the software updates and everything are kind of all over the place, you are definitely getting significantly better phones for like slightly more money. So the only big thing this phone has going for it is the battery. This thing has like a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, which is crazy large. It's a pretty big size battery to have inside of this phone. So I will definitely tell you without a doubt, I look at a phone like the Samsung Galaxy A23, and I don't really think this phone is necessarily worth buying anymore. I don't really think it was worth buying when it first came out. I mean, I think it was worth buying when it first came out, but I think there are better options out there for you nowadays. So that's kind of what I'd say. So buy, like a Galaxy S21, buy a Galaxy S22, maybe even buy a Galaxy S20 over this thing, in my opinion. So that's kind of how I see it. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.